This is your lab writing checklist. It should help you when you're writing your labs. You can actually use it as a checklist by like checking these off as you go. And this is sort of like your rubric for how your labs will be graded as far as like formatting goes. Obviously, there's some grading based on content as well. So first we have neatness and organization. This is the only one that's kind of general, like the whole lab should be done neatly. You're typing these, so it should be the same font all the way through, the same size font all the way through. If you're going to bold or italicize something, it should be consistent. So for example, if you're going to, when you get to the safety down here, if you're going to embed your safety into the procedure steps, you can italicize it or bold it or something. If it's going to be like its own separate section, then it doesn't need that. It says that you can put like labels or something for each section. So like if you wanted to write title at the top and then put a little colon and then write your title. If you then after that wanted to put date with a little colon, write your date. And then lab partners, notice I'm going in the same order as over here. Lab partners, and then again colon, and then what's after that? Purpose, and then again a colon. Maybe you don't want to do colons every time. Maybe, oopsie, erase. Maybe instead of colons, you decide to underline it each time. Maybe instead of underlining, you decide to bold. So that's what I mean by like consistent formatting, is whatever you choose should be the same each time. So your title, moving on from neatness, your title should, it needs to be descriptive of the lab, and it cannot be the one that I give you. For example, the first lab we do of the year, I call it the uncertainty lab. You should call it something a little more specific and a little more descriptive. Whatever phrasing you use there is probably also going to pop up in your purpose, and that's okay. It's okay if your title almost sounds like a sentence. It shouldn't be a complete sentence, but it's okay if it's long like that. Like titles don't need to be short if there is a need to say more. The date should be the original date that you collected the data. So the date we do the lab in class, that should be the date that's on there. If you will do work on additional days, and you can add those dates in as well. The additional, when I say do work on additional days, I mean like lab write-up days. So like if you do your analysis questions one day, your discussion one day, error analysis another day, conclusion another day, like all those dates should appear. Lab partners, you are always going to have lab partners. Most of the time you are writing labs up by yourself, but you are always going to have partners. We don't have enough stuff at our school for everybody to do their own individual lab, and for safety purposes, there's a lot of reasons you need to work with at least one other person. So you are always going to have a group of people that you work with, but it doesn't mean that you will be writing the lab up with them, and their first and last names go in this lab partner section. The purpose is the next section. It should it should be like one sentence, like maybe two. It shouldn't really be that long. It's not meant to be like a paragraph, but you need to write enough to say what's going on in the room. It should be sort of like explaining the problem, and it should always start here. I gave you 2 ways to start it. The purpose of this lab is 2, or the objective of this experiment 2. I mean, you can mix and match those words. It should always be to identify, calculate, or determine. Those are your only 3 options. You are always determining, calculating, or identifying something. There's no learning goals there. The purpose of this lab is to learn. No, that's never, ever, ever the purpose. Hopefully that's a byproduct of what's happening. Of course, we want you to learn. We want you to expand your knowledge. We want you to do research. We want you to do all these things that help you grow as a student. But the purpose of this lab is, the purpose of every lab is always to determine, calculate, or identify something. There should be a little summarizing as to how we're going to determine, calculate, or identify that specific thing. So again, that's going to be different for every lab. But again, it should be like 1, 2, maybe even 3 sentences, but not like a full paragraph. Definitely not multi-paragraphed. The next section is materials list. That should definitely be in more than one column, 2, 3, 4. It should be just a list of materials. You can bullet point it out. You can tab it out. You can number it out. You could go 1, 2. You could number them all. If you want to split it up into like chemicals and equipment under the materials heading, you could do that. If you want to mix it together, you can do that too. It just needs to be like in multiple columns. It can't just be like one long list that takes up the whole page. Don't do that. Safety, I kind of said it earlier, but you can either embed the safety into the step that it goes with. For example, if there's a place at which you're using fire, you could in that step say be sure to roll up your sleeves, pull your hair back, like list all the safety features that go with fire, or you can put it in its own little section between the materials and the procedure, so you can make it its own section there. The procedure is a list of numbered steps. For the most part, I give you this. Procedure is something I give you, and then this is usually stuff you have to do on your own, the purpose, materials, and safety. You will get all of that information from reading the procedure. Honestly, the purpose, you will probably need to read the analysis questions in order to fully understand what the purpose is. So after the procedure is the data tables. The data tables should include qualitative and quantitative information. If your data table only includes quantitative information, then you should have like an observations section below your data table. So it's up to you. You can either combine this into one table or you can sort of make it like two little sections, but you should always have qualitative and quantitative information. Your calculations is where you show me all the work. That should be its own section. All of your work should have proper units and proper sig figs. Just because it's showing me work, it doesn't mean that it's like scratch work. It should be organized. It should be easy to read. You're welcome to write it on a piece of paper, take a picture and insert the picture. That's fine. You can type it in if that's easier for you. You can write it on an iPad, like use an iPad and a thing to write it. I don't care how you get the work in there, but it needs to be neat, organized. It has to have proper sig figs and proper units. Your analysis questions, you'll always have analysis questions. They should be answered in complete sentences. More importantly, they should be answered in complete thoughts. If I'm writing complete thoughts on your when I return your lab reports, it's because you're not answering the question fully. You're giving me basic answers. And remember, this year we're trying to elevate how we speak, and we're trying to elevate the thought process. So complete thoughts when it comes to writing your answers. Error analysis and discussion, these two here are only assigned sometimes. There's some labs where an error analysis is not possible. We can only do an error analysis if we have a known value. For example, if we're finding the density of water, we can compare that to the known value of water of 1, and then we can calculate a percent error. We do that here in the calculation. So if we calculate a percent error, then we're doing an error analysis. Again, I assign these separately, so you can ask me or find them on Canvas, but they're assigned separately. There is an example. This down here is an example of how you do an error analysis. You should be typing up these boxes, and then this information here is what should be specific to your lab. It cannot be human error, so whatever you're doing here to correct it needs to be fixing a procedure step or adding a procedural step or maybe changing a piece of equipment, but something like more time, that's human error, or something like don't spill, that's human error. So those things don't count. You need to be able to modify a piece of equipment, you need to be able to add a procedure step, or you need to be able to change a procedural step. The discussion is sort of like an essay. and it's research-based for the most part. There should be one paragraph where you discuss error. There should be another paragraph where you relate it to the content we're learning in class, and then a third paragraph where you're relating it to like the real world. Maybe it's a job, maybe it's research you found, maybe it's a natural occurring event that you found, something that relates. That last paragraph usually takes quite a bit of research. So if you do a discussion, you need a minimum of 2 citations. Sometimes you have to cite for your error analysis as well. Sometimes this requires a citation. For example, if you're going to replace a piece of equipment with something more accurate, then you need to cite like how you found that piece of equipment, unless it was something that we use regularly. But this does the discussion does require 2 citations minimum. You can obviously do more than that, but minimum. There should be no first person writing in the discussion. Honestly, there really shouldn't be any first person writing in the lab. Every once in a while, an analysis question might say like something about what you think. In that case, it's okay to reply with I think. But for the most part, in chemistry, we don't necessarily care what you think. We only care about what you know, what you can prove, what evidence can be supported. So there's not really any point in a lab at which you should ever use first person. Which brings me to our final spot, the conclusion. You always have a conclusion. The only 2 that are optional, again, are error analysis and discussion. I assign those separately. But you will always have a conclusion, this last one down here. It should be, again, 1, maybe 2 sentences, not written in first person, and it should be results that relate back to your purpose. So if your purpose was to identify X, Y, and Z, then your conclusion should be X is this, Y is this, Z is this. The end. If it included a % error, it should say X is this, Y is this, Z is this, with a % error of this, this, and this relatively, or whatever it might be. It should not be summarizing your lab. I tend to get a lot of, in the beginning anyway, a lot of conclusions that are 3-4 paragraphs because you're summarizing the lab. But in reality, I probably just read, 4 or 5 pages worth of your lab. I don't need it summarized at the end. So your conclusion should be very straightforward. It should be communicating your results as they relate back to the purpose, and they should be including any % error or % yield that you calculated. And that's it. I know that was a lot, but that's how you write a lab. You'll have access to this worksheet all year, so you should reference it every time you do a lab. When you sit down to write a pre-lab, I would have this out. Your pre-lab is the title through the data table. That's the pre-lab. That's stuff that should be done before the lab. Your data table obviously won't be filled out, but you should have the margins of your data table filled out. And then you'll write in values, obviously, the day of, and then everything else, your calculations through conclusion, are for after the lab. That's part of your write-up. So every time you're doing a pre-lab, you should have this out. Every time you're writing your post-lab analysis, you should have this out. Just so you can read each section, go watch this video multiple times. Make sure you are completing each section in the correct format. Again, obviously, doing all these things is a great start. The content matters as well. But again, that'll be different with each lab. Please let me know if you have any questions. And that's it.